So everyone is playing the remake of Resident Evil 4 right now. And to be honest, I want to play it as well. Ever since 7, Capcom have really been on a roll with the series, and I'd even go as far as to say that the remake of 2 was one of my top 5 games of the last decade. So how could I not want to play the remake of the game that everyone considers to be the best in the entire series? There's just one problem here. I never played the original. Now, unlike the earlier games in the franchise, I'm actually old enough that this is a game that I could have played as a child. I was 10 years old when it was released, and I had the hardware required to play it. I also had friends who played it and who constantly talked about its greatness, but for some reason I never got around to doing it myself. So, after 18 years of procrastination, I've finally done it. And here are my thoughts. Now, first of all, this game differs quite a bit from the original 3 and the more modern ones in that it is not a horror game. Resident Evil 4 is an action spy thriller with zombies that honestly reminds me more of Metal Gear Solid than it does the rest of the franchise. Now, I do not mean this as an insult, because overall I had an absolute blast playing through this. But I was also kinda shocked by this, because I always thought that it was in 5 that the series departed from its horror roots. But there is quite frankly nothing this game does that makes it any more of a horror game than 5 is. Now, my controversial takes don't end here, and this is going to be the big one. I actually like Ashley. Now, don't get me wrong here, she's absolutely terrible as a character. I could even go as far as to say that she is not a character at all. There's basically no consistency in her personality. One minute she is a scaredy cat screaming, "Help me, Leon!" And the next she steps up her game and shows us that she's actually a strong independent woman and that she's an expert at driving bulldozers. Like, who the hell even taught the daughter of the President of the United States to pilot a bulldozer? Her actions and personality is more or less completely dependent on what is required to make the current big set piece work. And that's why I like her. Because while she has zero personality and an annoying as hell voice, she is mechanically fun. And in the end, that's what Ashley is. She's a mechanic. And as a mechanic, she works really well. Having to constantly keep track of where she is so that she doesn't get dragged away by the plagas or killed by a stray bullet adds another layer to the combat that really synergizes well with the overall combat experience. And this is where I think the game truly shines. The combat feels really wonky at first, there is no way to strafe, and the aiming is dependent on where Leon is physically pointing his gun rather than hitting the center of the screen, which takes some getting used to. But once you get used to all this, you get an experience unlike anything I've ever experienced in a game before. Despite all of this clunkiness, the game requires you to keep moving at all times. The plagas are often approaching from several different directions, and sometimes you might even have to deal with long-range enemies shooting projectiles at you, all while babysitting Ashley. If you stand still, you will quickly get overwhelmed, and since your movement is quite clunky, you need to plan your moves several steps in advance before you carry them out. When you really nail a combat segment and everything happens exactly as planned, you feel like the most badass action hero on the planet, despite the fact that what just happened on the screen looks kinda uneventful. But everything doesn't always go as planned. The plagas have a lot of aces up their sleeves. Shooting the head off one might make it transform into a more dangerous form, and then you need to quickly adapt and deal with a new threat. There's also a significant amount of boss fights in the game. After all, it wouldn't be a Resident Evil game without them. The fights are overall really good. There are some moments where the clunky controls don't really hold up here, but the design and the encounters themselves are varied and challenging. That is, unless you bring an RPG. I brought an RPG for 2 bosses in the game, one of them being the final boss, and both fights ended after a single shot. Allowing you to just purchase an I win button like this made these fights feel kinda underwhelming, and I overall just think it's a really weird design decision. But combat isn't all there is to this game. Like in previous titles, exploration is a very large part of the game. Unlike those games, the levels are a lot more linear now though. The map design is overall linear with minor forks in the road and a couple of moments where you have to backtrack. There are also plenty of puzzles to be solved. Said puzzles are nothing super advanced. The standard format is to explore an area for pieces and use those pieces to solve said puzzle. Sometimes you simply have to go to a couple of different places and pull a couple of different levers. Sometimes you instead get pieces that you have to match together at a central hub, and sometimes we even have to get Ashley to help us progress. So while the puzzles are fairly simple, they are also varied enough that I never really felt like I was doing the same puzzle over and over again throughout the course of the game. With Resident Evil 4 being a Japanese game, the story itself is absolutely insane. It starts out with Leon going to a remote Spanish village to save the president's daughter, but early on we start to realize that this is just part of a crazy plan the cult of religious nutjobs called the Los Illuminados has to take over the entire world. The US government is of course not the only organization involved in this, and we get introduced to several familiar faces who have their own agendas in it all. This is all presented in a manner befitting the most campy B-movies out there. There are insane kung fu moves in the cutscenes. Leon constantly drops cheesy one-liners.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
Since you're here, why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
And the game overall just doesn't seem to take itself very seriously. Something that is actually really important for a story this insane to actually work. Now, there are also some bad things about this game. One of them is in my opinion how underutilized Ashley is as a character. One of the reasons for why she never gets any real character development is that she hardly opens her mouth throughout the entire adventure unless she's screaming for Leon to help her. I would like to see some back and forth banter between the two characters in the many calmer sections of the game. The fact that she's absent from the party for most of the game doesn't help either. Every time you save her from something, she immediately seems to get kidnapped again. So most of the game is actually played with Leon being alone. Like most of the AAA games of this era, it is also filled to the brim with various set pieces that are mechanically different from the rest of the game. There is a minecart ride segment, a bulldozer ride, and a boss that is fought with harpoons while riding a boat. The only thing missing is a turret segment, although I guess the big cannon kinda counts. As is almost always the case with these type of segments, they really don't work that well, and these moments are far and away the weakest parts of the game. The game also overstays its welcome quite a bit. It does drag on far too long in the end, and some of the later levels are a slog to get through. The game took me roughly 13 hours to get through, but that could easily have been cut down to 10 without losing any of the parts of the game that actually matter, and this would have greatly improved the pacing of the game. So, should you play this game today? Hell yeah, you should. Resident Evil 4 is, despite its flaws, an amazing experience. It's really hard to draw any comparisons here because I haven't played any other game that is even remotely similar to this. The combat is completely unique, and after some getting used to it, flows really well, and the story and setting feels like something lifted straight from a Metal Gear Solid game. So, what is my final score? I give this game 852 out of 903 enemies killed. Play it now if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching everyone, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. While working on this video, I actually finished playing the remake as well, so I will be releasing a continuation video where I talk about my impressions of it in the coming days. I'm not going to spoil too much for you, but I can safely say that the original is still worth playing despite the fact that the remake exists.